Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We have 4 new updates today. Palantir has filed and received, they were granted. They filed this a little bit a while back, about 2 years ago, but they received on February 1st and February 8th, which were about a week ago, 4 new patents. We're going to go into these patents today. We're going to try to understand them. I did a video back in December or early January where Palantir was also granted 4 new patents, and those patents had to do a lot with ontology, databases, relationships between how they acquire and manage data, and also some VR stuff, which was super interesting. Maybe some metaverse plays that they're trying to go for. So Palantir is no stranger to patents. They have hundreds of patents. Patents don't guarantee that your company is going to be able to just have ownership over one thing, because software patents are a little bit harder to enforce because it's software at the end of the day. And a lot of companies work with software, but nonetheless, it does give them some level of protection for the proprietary assets that they have built in relationship to the things that they have created via their technology. And as long as you have those proprietary patents, it's at least a good check against if someone were to compete against them and were to use some of the similar technologies. Now, obviously, people can just modify them, right? And then they don't violate the patent. So the patent is not the biggest deal in the world, but it is important, at least from an investor perspective, to understand what are they patenting for? What new products might they be working on? What new innovations are they trying to go for? And why are they getting these patents now, given they filed them years ago? Meaning, what were they thinking a couple years ago about what the future would be like in relationship to their company? Super interesting stuff. Let's go through all 4 of them right now. Okay, so as always, these patents are brought to you from this account on Twitter, one of the best accounts. I'll leave them in the description. They do a lot of investigative journalism on Palantir. Amazing account, finds out a lot of stuff. So this was granted. This was filed on June 19, 2020, and it was granted to Palantir Technologies on February 1st, 2022. Let's read it. Example embodiments described herein pertain to a geospatial interface system configured to cause display of geospatial data with a graphical user interface at a client device. Receive data points from multiple data sources, unify the data points, and present the unified data points as an interactive graphical element within the graphical user interface in a presentation layer separate from the geospatial data. In example embodiments, the geospatial interface system may be or include a group of 1 or more server machines configured to provide 1 or more geospatial data displays, indexing, and management services. A client display may accordingly display a graphical user interface generated by the geospatial interface system. What this to me describes is an interface to index and display geospatial data. Now, why is geospatial data important? There's 2 reasons. Number 1, Palantir unveiled a meta constellation product. I did a video on that. I'll leave that in the description, where basically they attach their software to sensors that are already on satellites in the sky, and they're able to give you real-time data from the sensors into their software to give you actionable insights on what to do based upon the geospatial imaging location that you are getting, the images that you're getting from locations that you have satellites on. Into the software, right? So in the video, they described if you're trying to figure out how to stop a violent hurricane, or not stop a violent hurricane, but make sense of what that hurricane is going to do, you can use the geospatial intelligence from the satellites at the intersection of Palantir software to recognize, oh, this hurricane is going to do X, Y, and Z. Here's all the businesses that need to be optimized. Here's all the things that supply chain should do a month in advance before the hurricane happens, right? Stuff like that, which is really, really powerful for governments and businesses to be able to use. So that Meta Constellation product, if you haven't checked it out, really watch that video. It gives a unique insight about what they're trying to do, especially with Edge AI, because you need a lot of Edge AI on IoT devices when you're getting sensors to be able to make sense of data from faraway objects that are not really connected to the internet. Second is their investment in Black Sky. Black Sky is Google Earth on steroids. I did a video on that in December. I'll leave that in the description. And basically, Black Sky actually works with NASA, right? NASA legitimately works with Black Sky. It's one of those companies that is able to also collect geospatial imagery and then feed that back into Palantir servers, and Palantir is able to actually use that data for some of their own clients, because that's the type of partnership they have with Black Sky. So I believe they knew they were going to invest in a company like this, and they were going to create this type of geospatial data product, which is just so phenomenal, because Palantir does a ton of stuff, and then on top of that, they're going to space and making sense of what's happening in space. It's just such a multifaceted company that they filed for these patents a long time ago. So this patent to me sort of indicates that they're trying to create a graphical user interface of what it means to interpret the data that they're getting from geospatial imagery and then make sense of it in their own proprietary way. Okay, next one from February 1st. This was filed January 16th, 2019. A data analysis system receives a data string comprising a natural language query pertaining to a dataset wherein the dataset is associated with a data object model comprising a plurality of objects, and parses the data string to identify a plurality of individual words within the data string. That's interesting. So this is providing an object-based response to a natural language query. This is the stuff like YouTube does with comments. If you ever go on YouTube comments and you click on them and the first 5 or 7 comments are like really positive, have you ever noticed that? Like you just click on a video and you look at their comments and they're like really positive comments. It's because YouTube does natural language processing, NLP, with their AI and machine learning to make the best comments come to the front, because like you get a better experience if you see fun comments and not hate comments at the beginning of a video. Now, sometimes a video gets too many hate comments and YouTube's not able to manage that. And if YouTube is able to do that, I don't know why they can't get rid of the scammers in the comments, but nonetheless, right? Like that's actually one of the ways in which you can use natural language processing. So it seems like they're trying to do that in relationship to a particular form of data. The data analysis system identifies based on the plurality of individual words, one or more objects of the plurality of objects, wherein the one or more objects are associated with the natural language inquiry in the data string. The data analysis system further determines one or more artifacts that are based on the data set, wherein each one of the more artifacts is associated with one or more of the objects and provides a response to the natural language query. That's a lot of natural language processing. I mean, I don't know exactly what the use case for this could be, especially because Palantir doesn't do like content data stuff, right? They're not like they don't have a ton of content that they have to manage like Facebook or YouTube and then like effectively show that content. So they must be getting some type of natural languaging processes system for the particular types of data that they analyze in a meaningful way. Now, Palantir works with a lot of companies and they manage a lot of different data. So there is a world in which they are trying to get a patent on specific companies that they work with in order to manage their data, that have to use NLP more than other types of data mechanisms to be able to make sense of what they're doing. For example, Palantir actually works with a media company in Switzerland called Ringier, and they totally optimize Ringier's entire business. I could see a use case of their NLP data patents, right? Their proprietary systems to be able to use NLP working with content companies, but it's also probably working with a bunch of other companies. Natural language processing, very, very interesting thing. I know it in relationship to social media. I don't know it in relationship to other things. That's stuff I have to research on more and try to analyze at a deeper level. But it does seem like they want to be able to understand how objects interact with words within objects and make sense of the data strings within those objects to ultimately produce better results. Cool. February 8th, 2022. This is a systems and methods for facilitating data object extraction from unstructured documents. This was in February 24th, 2020. This is right before COVID that they filed for this. And they got it 2 years later. System and methods are provided for facilitating data object extraction from unstructured documents. Unstructured documents may include data in an unorganized format, such as raw text. The system may use natural language processing to determine characteristics of the terms used in the unstructured document. The system may prompt a user to select terms from the document corresponding to the characteristics or properties of a data object being generated. The user may select terms from the document, and the system may generate a data object according to the selected terms. Okay, this actually kind of piggybacks off the natural languaging process stuff that we just saw in the previous patent that I didn't know what the full use case of it would be. But here they're talking about unstructured documents. So unstructured documents may include data in an unorganized format such as raw text. So here's sort of how I could think they could be using this. Palantir is trying to be the operating system for the entire enterprise, the entire business. In a business, I just had an interview with a former IBM employee, and he was talking about how when he's selling data services through AI and machine learning to C-suite executives, because that's what his day job is. A lot of times those execs are like, yeah, but we have a lot of bad data. And his argument was like, there is no such thing as good data. All data is bad, right? In 20 years, he hasn't seen what good data looks like, because you have some data where the names are not spelled correctly, or this is happening, or the revenue is not incorporated correctly in the Excel sheet. So there's all these different variables that exist within the data that can make the data bad. And if the data is bad, it's obviously a little bit more harder to analyze. Nonetheless, the nature of a system like Palantir or a company like Palantir is to be able to create a technology that is able to forecast what the data should be, what the spelling of the word should be, what the revenue number should be, based upon using a lot of these time series forecasts to be able to make predictions for what the missing number should be. And at the end of the day, you're paying them to make sense of this data. So even if it's bad data, they have the $1 million technology to actually make sense of it. That's why this stuff is so valuable. So when they're talking about unstructured documents, I could imagine they go into an organization, they get tons and tons of documents. Let's say they're working with drug discovery, and they have to interpret all of these documents that are going into the Palantir Foundry software. Now they've partnered with this hypothetical drug discovery company, and these documents are unstructured. And there's a lot of words in these documents that they have to use NLP, natural language processing, to be able to make sense of that document so that they can feed that data into the operating system to then provide some type of actionable insight for the customer that is using Foundry. That's where I think the unstructured documents here make sense, and the NLP intersection also makes sense as well. So that's sort of my use case on how this patent would ultimately apply. All right, last one. This was, 2018, about 4 years ago. They filed for this. They just got it February 8th. This is row level and column level policy service. Okay. Example embodiments relate to a policy service employed to perform operations to generate and maintain a data set that comprises at least a column and a row that intersect at a cell. Assign an access policy to a row or column of the dataset wherein the access policy is defined by one or more access credentials required to receive access that the cell that the intersects with the row or column. Receive a request to read the dataset from a user account wherein the user account has an associated credential. Filter the cell that intersects with the row or column of the dataset based upon the access policy and the credential of the user account in response to receiving the request from the user account, and provide the user account with access to the filtered dataset. That is interesting. So I would be lying if I knew exactly what this means from like my basic level interpretation of what I think this means. If they're talking about row level and column level policy service, what's confusing here is I don't understand what policy service is, wherein the access policy is defined. I'm interpreting policy as they assign a particular policy to a row and a column, and I'm thinking of just like a basic Excel sheet, right? Row and columns, and there's data sets within those row and columns, and it's performing particular options. So when they say filter the cell that intersects with the row or column of the data set based on the access policy and the credential of the, so this kind of might make sense. The way I would interpret this broadly, and again, this is my interpretation of what this patent could mean. This stuff's a little complicated sometimes, so you kind of dissect through this. Is one of the main elements of Palantir is they're able to have cross communication of data within an organization. So let's take the government, for example. The FBI and the CIA have data. They can't show each other certain data because certain stuff is confidential to the FBI and CIA, but they do have to cross communicate other sets of data in order for each of the respected party to be able to make sense of universal forms of data that they both need to see. This is what initially started Palantir to stop terrorism attacks, because one of the beliefs was we could have stopped 9/11 if there was more communication, but because there wasn't a infrastructure to manage and protect data and show data in a confidential way, then there wasn't able to be that communication that could actually predict some of this stuff that was happening. So if they are saying that the policy of the row and column that has the data is built on the filtration of the user account and credentials of the user that is able to have access to that data, then theoretically, I think this patent is applying to the ability for cross communication within data sets and specific users of those data sets to be able to happen in a classified, secure, and protected way. Meaning this user has access to only this part, only a subset of this part based upon their credentials and the row and column they're allowed to see, but this user doesn't have access to the other rows and columns based upon their credentials because they're not allowed to see it. If they could create a patent that actually establishes that they have the technology that is able to facilitate that, then, I mean, that's a really meaningful patent and a really meaningful way to ultimately allow their cross-communication data sets to actually be cross-communicated within an organization. Not a lot of companies are able to do this because this is hard stuff. I mean, this is very difficult. A lot of companies try to do this and they fail because it's really hard to get the finance guy to see all the marketing stuff, but the marketing stuff to not see all the stuff from the finance guy, because this stuff needs to make sense and it needs to happen in a meaningful way. And it's very difficult to be able to use data operations in order to make it actually perfected to the point where a non-technical person could just log in, see what they need to see, don't see what they don't need to see, and then move on with their life. And Palantir wants to make that a little bit more easy, would be my guess. Cool. 4 more patents. Nice stuff. Again, the whole point of patents is to let you understand a little bit more about what the company is doing and what trajectory they're on in terms of the products and services they're trying to offer. So really, really interesting stuff to go through these patents. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments. My name is Amit. Looking forward to reading them. I will see you in the next one.